Welcome to Ruger Tech Tips. I'm going to show you how to reassemble your Wrangler or Super Wrangler revolver. So here I have a Super Wrangler and I've also got a standard Wrangler. To do this you're going to need a couple tools. You're going to need a saw-faced hammer. You're going to need a screwdriver with a number 10 Torx bit, a standard flat blade screwdriver, a 1/16 punch, and a non-marring punch. Here I've got a brass punch that's about the same, just under the size of your pivot, your trigger or cylinder latch pivot hole. And of course, a good pair of safety glasses. So the first thing I want to make sure is I have no live ammunition in my revolver or in my work area. So I've got my 2 cylinders from my Super Wrangler here. I've got my long rifle, my Magnum. Those are clear of ammunition. I've got a regular Wrangler here that is fully assembled, and I double check that to make sure my chambers are all empty. I'm good there. And of course I have no ammunition in my work area. So to begin with, I'm going to install this. They're kind of in sub-assembly, so I'm going to begin by installing the gate and putting that in place. There is a little shelf here on the bottom of the gate that the gate spring is going to ride on, so you need to pay attention to this little angle on the side. So this goes in obviously in the gate pivot hole here, and I want to install it in the closed position. And I do everything with a revolver upside down with the gate side towards me. That way it's oriented correctly. I'm going to grab my gate spring and my cylinder latch, and the cylinder latch has an arm that comes off it, and it's going to match this 90-degree leg of my gate spring. So I'm going to nest these two together. So I'm going to take my gate spring, put it so the pivot is in the middle here, and these two legs are kind of parallel. From there, I'm going to drop this whole assembly, I'm going to have to split them here, down inside the frame. And I just got to get my cylinder latch over so it's riding up, nesting next to my gate spring. So they're going to sit like that, and I can see if I turn this around, I can look, and the end of my gate spring is sitting in that little shelf of my loading gate, and that's correct. So I'm going to set that there. Next, I'm going to build up as a sub-assembly both my hammer and trigger. My hammer is going to need the pawl installed on it. So on what would be in the shooting position like this, what would be on the left-hand side, I'm going to put the pawl, and it's going to be coming up towards the face of the hammer. My trigger is going to have my transfer bar to the outside, and it's going to, when I install it, it's going to hang down like that. So I'm going to take both of these and put these together. The transfer bar is going to go in first to the rear, and then my pawl is going to go over the top of it, and the two are going to drop in together. I'm going to install my trigger cylinder latch pivot, and that's got a cutout, which is what the gate spring goes in. It's a detent to hold it in place. So I want to put that part of it in last. So I'm going to start from the gate side, pushing that through everything, and whereas this will go in last. It is a little tricky to line this up. I need my 1/16 punch to compress the gate spring out of the way. And I'm going to start this over the top of it. And I'm going to start that through, and I have to push it through the frame, through the cylinder latch, through the cylinder, and I want to come out just to the other side of the trigger and not go beyond the trigger, because I need room for my pawl guide. So I'm going to put that in. So you'll start this through, sometimes you give them a little twist, make sure they don't tip down, and you may have to align all of these up as you go through. Move the trigger around, move the cylinder latch around to get that pivot going through. A couple little taps sometimes is the best way to get that to start. So I'm bringing that up just where I just start to see that coming out of the far side of my trigger. From there, I need to put in my pawl guide, and there's a loop on this, and in the upside down position, that loop is going to be facing forward, so I'm going to drop that down in. Now I use both my punches to do this. I use my 1/16 punch to get it through there, to start it down in, and then I'm going to go in through my trigger pivot hole to catch it on the other side to get it lined up. So once my trigger pivot is in, I can just tap that the rest of the way through. And you can feel when that's lined up on either side. You can get those lined up. All right. Last thing I'm going to put in on this part is I'm going to put in my hammer pivot. It has 2 detents on either side, so it doesn't matter which way it goes in, left to right, right to left. It makes no difference on this one. And just a matter of lining up your hammer, sliding your pivot through, and I just make sure it's flush on each side. So now I'm ready to build up my grip frame to install this in here. We've got a couple spring and plungers. There's a Paul spring and plunger. It has a small plunger with a long spring, and that's going to go into the back of my frame. We have 2 screws, which is our grip frame screws, and then we have the hole which would be in the shooting position would be above that to the left, and that's the hole that this spring and plunger goes in. Double check and make sure you didn't put it in one of the holes that the screws go in. We see this is fairly common to get revolvers back like this, where the screw, they put it in the hole and then you compress it with the screw and it destroys the spring and plunger. So make sure it's in the correct hole. I'm going to build up my grip frame. I have my cylinder latch spring and plunger, and that goes in spring first, plunger out. So it's kind of opposite of our Paul spring and plunger. I'm going to put in my main spring assembly, my hammer strut, and that goes in from the bottom. And if I put it in where I left this assembly pin out more on the left, I know what position to put that in. So now I'm ready to bring these 2 halves together. So I want to get my front screw close by. I'm going to lift this up, make sure you don't lose your spring and plunger. And I'm going to bring the 2 halves together, and I'm going to line my mainspring, my hammer strut spring assembly up. And you also have to align this spring from the back. It's got to get below this ear, so you're going to have to take your fingernail, take a small tool to get it compressed. In this position, underneath the frame, in the grip frame, we have our trigger return spring, and we need to compress that to get it on top of the trigger. So I need to take a long screwdriver, get in there. My grip frame is going to move back and then come forward as that comes around the trigger. So I put it right down on the bench. I put the edge of the screwdriver on that spring. So you'll slide that through. The spring will come around that trigger, and then I've got my thumb, so I'm holding that in position. And I like to put that front screw in just to take the tension off it. So I'm going to take my number 10 Torx bit. I don't make this super tight. I just start to snug it up just to hold the 2 halves together. At this point, I probably will double check my work to make sure everything's working. So you can make sure your mainspring is seated. I can point this up so my transfer bar falls to the rear, and I can bring that hammer to full cock. And it should cycle. As long as I point that up, everything should feel normal. That's working, so I know I've done everything correctly at this point. I can start to reassemble everything. So I'm going to take my long screw. I kept track of which hole it came out of. It was out of the ball side, not the gate side. So I'm going to start that in, and I'm going to screw that screw right on in. I put my fingers on either side of the hammer pivot. It may move a little bit. I can help it with my fingers just to get that lined up, because that's going to intersect my hammer pivot and hold it in place. That's going to go into that detent slot in the hammer pivot. I can feel my 2 halves coming together. I'm going to take my other screw, my shorter than this one but longer than the rear 2. I'm going to install that on the far side. Now your revolver may have those screws reversed. It really doesn't matter. As long as I try to keep them the same when I reinstall them as how they came out of the gun, because I know they fit best that way. And lastly, I have the 2 identical screws that go in the back, and I'm going to just start both of those at the same time. Once I have all 5 screws, I'm going to go double check and make sure, if I feel the grip frame, everything feels like it should be. I'm going to go back through and just double check to make sure that these are all snug. Again, you don't have to be overly tight, you just want them snug. And those are good. So next up, I'm going to take one of my cylinders. I'm going to open my gate, install my cylinder, push in my base pin, install my base pin, and I want to put my grips back on. So I'm going to put my left hand grip panel on, my right hand grip panel with the screw, take my screwdriver, and just tighten that up. Don't go overly tight on the grip screw. They just have to be just a little bit snug. Some people over tighten these and can actually break the grip panels. So after you've put everything back together, you want to make sure that everything functions properly. So I've got my gate open, my cylinder spins freely. I'm double checking that I have no live ammunition there. I'm going to close my gate and I'm going to cycle the gun. It's cycling. I'm going to test fire it. Everything is working the way it should. So you successfully reassembled your Wrangler revolver. Now, a couple things regarding cylinders, and we mark these cylinders differently depending on what caliber they are. This is the Super Wrangler. So on the Super Wrangler, what we have with it comes with 2 cylinders, it comes with a 22 long rifle and a 22 Magnum. So on the 22 long rifle, it has 3 markings, 2 at the rear, 1 at the front. This is a 22 long rifle. Whereas the Magnum cylinder has 2 markings, but it says 22 Magnum on it. So you can distinguish which cylinder is which. Whereas the standard Wrangler, and this gets a little confusing, this is a 22 long rifle cylinder. It has 2 marks. Doesn't have the 3rd one up front, but it is the same. It is 22 long rifle like this cylinder is. So the standard Wrangler, 2 lines, it's long rifle. On the Super Wrangler, for 22 long rifle, we have 3 markings. 2 here, 1 at the front, and the Magnum has the 2, and it's marked 22 Magnum. The most important thing to remember about cylinders is do not interchange your cylinders. Don't take the cylinders out of this gun and put it in another gun, whether it's a Super Wrangler or not. Don't swap your cylinders because these are all fit for the proper headspace. The biggest thing you don't want to do is you don't want to take a 22 Magnum cylinder and put it in the aluminum frame Wrangler, the regular Wrangler. That you absolutely do not want to do. You want to avoid doing that. And that really is a safety concern. So keep your cylinders with each gun, specifically because they are headspace for that revolver. They're not interchangeable. So that's complete reassembly on the Wrangler revolver. Thanks for watching this Ruger Tech Tip.